I appreciate so much that you're joining us here for this session on improving systems for teaching and learning. So as you heard in our introductory comments, there's a lot of concern right now about student learning and where students are now compared to their pre-pandemic cohorts. So we've been thinking a lot here at PACE about what exactly we need to do to both support our educators and to make sure that students are getting the kinds of instructional opportunities that they need and that they deserve in order to catch up academically, but also to thrive. So we have a really great panel here today. I'm going to introduce them and then we'll go ahead and jump in. Benjamin Cottingham is the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships at PACE. In his role at PACE, he works in partnership with districts, counties, networks, and state agencies to help drive system improvement. Adalberto or Beto Hernandez is the principal at George Washington Elementary School in Madera Unified School District. He is a lifelong educator. And Gustavo Morales is the director of the California Labor Management Initiative, which aims to engage school system unions and management as collaborative partners in creating, resourcing, and implementing solutions for improving and strengthening the public education system. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Before we get started, what I'd like for each of you to do is to spend a little bit of time getting to know the people at your table. We're gonna have quite a bit of time during this session to engage with these ideas as a table, and all of us up here will also be coming down during the session to engage with you. So to get to know the people at your table, please share your name, your organization, and why you chose to come to this breakout session. So I'm going to ask each of our speakers to come up and share a bit about the work that they're engaged in, and then we'll be able to come back together and reflect and push on what we've heard. So Gustavo, I'd like to start with you. You've been in the trenches this year working with teachers and deeply engaged in the tensions between labor and management and improving those relationships. Can you tell us what teachers are saying they need at this critical juncture?
So I have, I think, one of the most interesting and fascinating jobs. In fact, that we were just talking about that in California or in education. I get to step into school districts every day and work with superintendents, labor leaders, board members, and others talking about what are the needs of the district and how do we build a collaborative approach to addressing them. So who we are, just to start off with, so the California Labor Management Initiative is a program of the CDE Foundation, and we basically build collaborative or safe spaces for teams, specifically around labor and management, to come together and talk and do things differently. Normally, when we think about labor and management, we think about the collective bargaining table, we think of wages, we think of working conditions. But what we're trying to create here at CalMI is really an opportunity to think differently, because when we really think about what teachers and classified and management have in common, there's 95% where they actually meet in the middle. 5% is really what they bargain. So what is the opportunity that we have and what have we learned? So we've gone over 170 districts since we started in 2015. It was a project that started from Tom Torlikson. And over the last 15 months, as you know, we've had a lot more engagement because labor and management has been, or the politicization of education. So this is where we've been across the state. A quick overview of what we are doing. So the partnership is really intentional to building this space and increasing educator voice. Really trying to lift up the insights of staff, right? We heard that at the opening plenary, is what opportunities do we have for staff to actually tell us what they need, whether it's in the classroom, around teaching and learning, or outside, which is support, or even thinking it further in appreciation and the definition of appreciation. So what our job here is really to work differently together. And the first thing we try to do is that we have unions think differently. How do they get involved in driving quality improvement? And management, how do they create more opportunities for input? So the first thing we have in this approach is we start with the conversations of trust, equity, and communication. When I go into a school district, one of the first things to do is get past the elephant in the room. We're kind of in a forced marriage, right? Nobody gets to choose. In a regular organization or business, we can say, this person's not working. Let's replace them. Well, because we are in a forced marriage, we actually have to have the conversation about that elephant or that trauma that happened, the change in leadership, something in the past that is not allowing us to move forward. So in a way, somebody keeps calling me the therapist, right? How do we get past that roadblock in order for us to get to work? Within that, the conversations really surround or are around these three pillars. Really establishing trust, building equity of voice, and establishing more pathways or on-ramps for communication. The approach, and I'm just going to talk about the approach briefly, but the approach really is about building the team or a space to be able to move the big topics that we're about to get to and what I'm hearing out in the field, and to be able to build a permanent space that lives past the personalities in the room. So this is a typical structure that we see when working with labor management partners. At the very top, we have a district learning team. Intentionally, it's not a leadership team. Superintendents are responsible, or board members are responsible, or teacher leaders are responsible to their members, constituents, or the overall system in producing results. Instead, how do we understand and learn from different parts of the district or different parts of the system that we don't typically hear from? So the very top is a district learning team. You see here, they're compiled of the superintendent, union leaders, administrators, mostly the assistant superintendent of HR or ed services, and then board members, 1, max 2. At the middle level there is around school learning teams. The school learning teams is built around the same idea, is how do we hear from those that are on the field or on the ground level experiencing that new initiative, right? If we have cursive now in the classroom, what are they saying about it? If we're installing community schools as an initiative and overall systems change, what are they saying? So that provides school teams the ability to listen to the field. And one key point here that I'll note is that classified members are a critical part of this work because they have a unique perspective, whether it's from the school bus or the cafeteria or even the janitors. What is the perspective from the classified members, and how do we incorporate that into our decision making? And then finally, once you get to the bottom tier, you start thinking about the grade levels departments or PLCs. So we really try to employ this management of complex change. So we try to think of these 5 areas of the work to really establish change. This is not mine, this comes from Mary Lippitt. So at the very top, we really think about visioning, skills, incentives, resources, and action plans. Without the vision, you have confusion. Nobody knows exactly what we're doing. Without the skills, everybody feels anxious about what is happening. Without the incentives, you have resistance. Typically, you should be thinking about what's in it for me, right? We're thinking about different power structures and power dynamics within a school system. Without the resources, or think of budget here, there's frustration. And then without a good action plan, there's false starts. So using that system, that collaborative systems approach, what we've learned is that practitioners want to talk about the following things. I'm going to go line by line, and I'm going to go curve into teaching and learning to be able to pass it over. So one of the top issues that educators want to talk about is employee well-being. Something that I've been hearing is that coming out of the pandemic, we've had a lot of resources for students. We've asked them how they're doing and thought about any learning loss within that. But typically, we have not asked about the adults or staff in the system and how they're doing and what has happened since. So employee well-being throughout this space is an opportunity for employees to say, we need this support for us to be able to come to work healthy and ready. So you can start seeing some of those typical trends down below. Support is a real big one. Just defining what support is a big conversation, usually 4 hours, because what management feels support is and what teachers feel support is are radically different. So just having the conversation of meeting in the middle is a LCAP conversation, really, because then they start thinking about where that budget should go and where the resources should go. Big issue too is around appreciation, and those are the top three that I hear is appreciation and what does it mean? Just because you worked in a district for 5 or 20 years and you get a pin, that's not enough. What does appreciation mean and how do we support and how do we build more appreciation through the system? Professional development, especially for classified here. How did they get trained? They are also taking care of students should some emergency happen. They also need to learn how to interact with each other and learn those skills that teachers are learning. Down the line, we see building trust, communication, cross-campus collaboration, especially in small school districts where there's 1 or 2 schools. You'll even see division there. So we try to build opportunities in professional development across campuses, and then relationship building, feedback on initiatives, and starting an initiative together. So I'll end with some teaching and learning pieces that we've been hearing. The first thing is support for educators in the classroom. What typical supports should we provide for for teachers? And again, we're talking about adult conversations and adult needs here. Knowing that, and typically in these conversations, we say, how do we stay student-centered? So I just want to put that out there before I get any feedback at the end. It is adult conversations, because if the adults are well, then the students are going to be well and be able to be ready. So another big topic is community schools that has been coming together, and educators are now having conversations, this just happened on Tuesday, where they all put up the job descriptions for community school, a coordinator or a manager. And they all in that room with the board member and with teachers and classified, they all said, what should this position be? Should it be classified management? Should it be management? Should it be a community partner? Or should this be, or should it be certificated? And within that conversation, they were able to see what are the impacts and where are the needs and how do we really build something together. In addition is implementation of new initiatives. So just like community schools, whenever something new comes down the pipeline, teachers want to be involved. They want to be very clear. They don't want to be responsible. And they don't want to make the decision. They just want to be the management to hear what is happening or what their needs are. The budget is a pretty big conversation. You can imagine I work with labor and management, 0.76. I've heard way too many times in the last 2 weeks. Teacher turnover and addressing the vacancies has been very, very big in the conversations that we've been hearing. Staffing within that, working conditions and health and safety that goes along with well-being, and then finally just the overall budget and thinking of staffing. So I'll press pause there and be able to turn it over, but I guess we're gonna join the conversation in a second. Thank you. I think he might need room to put up his laptop.
Next, Principal Hernandez, I'd like for you to come up and tell us a little bit about your school and how you've organized your school to better support teachers, to address student learning and engagement, and how you've seen your culture and your outcomes change in recent years.
Good morning, Gustavo. First of all, thank you for asking how we are doing. Thank you for asking that. A little stressed for sure, but it's very rewarding at the school site level. Whenever I get stressed out, I just go to a kindergarten classroom and get a lot of hugs, and I instantly feel better. I did that yesterday. It was very stressful yesterday, and I went into a kindergarten classroom and I got about 20 hugs. And then I washed my hands and sanitized, and I asked the teacher if anybody had the stomach flu because it's going around, and but I was fine, and I instantly felt better. So Adalberto Hernandez, I'm feel privileged and humbled to be here. I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about our school and why I'm here. And so I'm here to talk to you about exactly it aligns with what Gustavo was saying about our teachers and leaders, myself at the school site level, what we're dealing with, and how we are implementing a project that's showing us outcomes. Small wins, but promising in the way that promising because we're going in a direction that we want to go in, and we're seeing small wins along the way. So I come from Madera, Central Valley, about 2.5 hours south of here. That's our humble little school. We just turned 100 years old last year, 1922 to 2022. A little bit about our school. We're a bilingual heritage language school. So I highlighted some key demographic points there. We are 80-20 in TK through second grade, 70-30 in third grade, and we are transitioning still. We are not up to fourth or sixth grade yet. Those grades are still monolingual. We live in the poorest community in Madera, Madera Unified, with 99% socioeconomically disadvantaged and a very high volume of students that are considered second language learners, or as we refer to them, multilingual students. 97% Hispanic Latino. It was interesting earlier hearing about chronic absenteeism. Before the pandemic, we had really good attendance rates. We're a walk-in community school at 6.4% back in 2018-19. But after the pandemic, that jumped to 41% chronic absenteeism. Last year, we dropped it to 16%. And that's largely due in part to the culture of our school and the teachers. The teachers and the school set the tone, and we are the most important factor for student learning and well-being. And that's our philosophy, is we make the most impact. We don't worry about what we can't control outside of school. Suspension rate, we have not suspended a single student since 2018-19. And so we have a really positive school culture. We believe in alternative discipline, and we do not suspend students, and students don't come to school and really have major issues. We are in year 4, like I said, of our transformation to a bilingual heritage language school, and it has resulted in a high turnover in our school, with entry-level teachers coming in with bilingual certifications and teachers that were monolingual having to transition out to support the DLI grades coming in every year. And so you can see here that 3/4 of our staff is 3 years or less in teaching. That's a big deal when we're talking about implementing a PLC project with Solution Tree, a dual language program, and teachers clearing their credentials their first 2 years. The workload is heavy. It's heavy. And with the PLC project intensive assistance model, it has been another layer of complexity to their first 2 years of teaching. And so we have a young staff, but the way we approach education and teaching and learning at our school is with the philosophy that school improvement is people improvement. That is the biggest thing for us, is understanding that we're talking about improving our people at the school site and building their efficacy to implement these systems. To quote Richard Dufour, the success of this concept of professional learning communities really largely depends on the commitment and persistence of educators within it. And so we are focusing on building our people, whether they're first year or fourth year teacher. We're building our people to understand what our philosophy and our approach is, and what to do in that system. Because it is very technical at times. So when I talk about the partnership with CCEE and Solution Tree with the intensive assistant model, to quote one of our mentors, Rich Smith, it was like drinking, last year was like drinking water from a fire hose. You can see here we have a multitude of coaches flying in from Maryland, Texas, Canada, California, and they come to our school every month. We have a Solution Tree coach every month that works with us, administrators, and we are learning about RTI, literacy, math, and assessment, and putting teaching and learning, operationalizing teaching and learning to be more effective. And so we're lucky to be one of the 3 schools in Madera that had the culture and the system in place necessary to implement this project. And we're starting to see some results in year 1.5. I talked about being chosen as a school with the culture to sustain this work. That cannot be understated how important having a strong culture is, because you're going to encounter a lot of technical changes when you're trying to improve teaching and learning in a very systematic way. And so having a strong culture is absolutely the foundation. Culture eats structure, and technical changes for lunch. Right? If you don't have the culture in the school to make changes, then your changes are going to falter. Or they might start, but they're not going to be sustainable. And so we had to have the culture, and luckily we've had that over the years. It's an ongoing process all the time to keep our culture strong, because that drives the work that we're doing to sustain the work. So we have to understand as a school and leadership that the difference between structure and culture. Structure are policies, procedures, rules, relationships. The culture are assumptions, beliefs, and values and habits of the people in the organization. And so we can have the most beautiful plan, the most beautiful procedures and structures. If we don't have the people committed to the work and understanding why we're doing what we're doing, and there are habits and beliefs and behaviors that are contradicting the work that we are laying out for teachers to do, then we're going to miss the mark. And so that's an ongoing challenge for us as leaders and teacher leaders, to make sure that our culture is strong to sustain the technical work. What you're about to see next is a lot of technical work that wouldn't be possible if the culture wasn't strong. And so the culture piece takes a long time sometimes for schools to get right before they can really tackle the technical work. And so what we're talking about here is shifting from PLC light. Show of hands, who's gone to a PLC conference by Solution Tree before? How many teachers in the room? Administrators? Any superintendents? You've probably gone to some of the conferences, and they give you a good overall picture of what it's like to implement the work. But what we're getting is a very unique opportunity to have intensive support of implementing what are called professional learning communities. You've heard the term. I've gone to conferences before, and I come back and we try a few things, and it's just not a really very strong system. And so we are implementing this with fidelity. We're attempting to implement it with those three big ideas: ensuring the focus on learning, collaborative culture, and results orientation. We had to start by really making sure that everyone knew this is a process, not a program, and we're focusing on progress, not perfection. A lot of us get stuck on being perfect with everything. There's a lot of different personalities in the school. Some are just, okay, big idea. Some are very detail-oriented. Some are just, let's go with it. Some take 2 weeks to decide, I'm going to make that decision and do something. So we have to understand our people, but also come together as teams to be interdependent and grow our capacity to do this work. Again, it takes a strong culture to be able to do that and have a strong mission and vision, collective commitments, understand our why, what is our purpose. If we understand that, and we understand that we are really looking to see what is the effectiveness of our work, and working together to reach our goals, then we understand how we can move in the same direction. And so it's very difficult and challenging work, and this is what it looks like. And so we have to start with, of course, having that strong culture to then understand how to clarify what students must learn. And that is the big picture, right? When we say, if I go back one slide and we look at that where we say guaranteed and viable curriculum is part of a focus of ensuring a focus on learning. This is our guaranteed and viable curriculum. Every grade level has, the teams have clarified essential learning for each unit by building shared knowledge. We are saying from the very beginning of the school year, we've identified what we're going to teach, when we're going to teach it, how many days, and we're going to track if students are learning what we're teaching. Do we know what students are supposed to learn, and do we know if they're learning it? And not waiting for assessments at the quarter, by the end of the year. I should be able to go to a team and go to a class and ask a teacher, what are you teaching today, and how do you know kids are learning it? And we have data to support that along the way, all year. And every team is responsible for understanding this work and putting it into practice. And then we tie it to local NWA assessments. Then we start to connect it to state assessments. Are we teaching the right things? Are students learning it? Do we have to adjust what we're teaching so that students are successful in external measures? Another philosophy is if our instruction is effective and our students are engaged and we're teaching the right standards, then our students will do well on external measures. The challenging part is having teams collaborate to come up with this work and to say and to understand that you have the autonomy to select your essential standards. You have the autonomy to create your own assessments. That's the loose. The tight is you're going to select essential standards, you're going to administer assessments, you're going to track student learning, and you're going to intervene in cycles. And so that is very, very challenging to lead for teacher leaders and administrators. And so before I get to that one, it's really important to note too that collaboration time is embedded in during the school day for our teachers. So we provide time to collaborate, and we are very clear about what collaboration looks like. And so here's what we call unit plans, right? That's part of clarifying what students must learn. And so we have really narrowed down how many essential standards we're teaching all year. The California standards call for students to learn a lot. There's a lot of standards. So to start this work, we're narrowing down one essential, this is gonna sound crazy, one essential standard in math per month, one essential standard for English language arts per month. Eight to 10 for the whole year. That's how we're starting. Then we build on that. But if we can do that and engage our teachers in cycles of inquiry with one essential for math and ELA every month, about 4 to 6 weeks, then it makes the work more sustainable, and it really helps us understand, again, are kids learning what they're supposed to be learning, and where's the data to support that? This is how they start. You unpack your standard, you create your assessment, you understand the skills that students have to be able to do. Sounds very simple, but when you're asking a team of teachers with different varying experiences to come up with this for each essential standard, first of all, to even select an essential standard, and then agree on what the skills students have to know how to do, that's a big win. If you can get to here, that's a big win, okay? And so here on the left, we have our essential standards. This team by Unit 2 back in October was still looking to do 2 essentials, right? And so then if they're gonna select 2 essentials, they're assessing, they're intervening, and they're responding to the instruction. And so then you take those skills in your assessment and you create learning targets. What are kids going to learn more specifically from that standard? And then you create assessments to then, in real time, understand if students, and really analyze, are students learning what we're teaching? Again, not waiting for quarter, semester, or end of year assessments. We're analyzing, kids are learning it right now. And those are called formative assessments and summative assessments. And this team did exit tickets, and it takes a lot of alignment within a team to do this work really well. And then they create their instructional calendar. This is agreed upon by the team, what they're gonna teach and when they're gonna teach it. And so then one challenge that teachers have is understanding that it's okay to teach it different ways. You're teaching the same standard, you're gonna assess it the same way, but you can teach it different ways. And so then, which is really interesting how teachers have been really wanting to teach it the same way, but part of research and inquiry is teaching it different ways and seeing what was more effective. That is also very challenging, but our teachers are building units for the first time, so we understand that they want to teach the same lessons and the same strategies for the same standards, and we're getting there. We're trying to get teams there to say, okay, you can explore different strategies at the same time. But here, again, it makes it very clear, what are our students supposed to learn and how are we going to teach it? And what are the resources? And what questions are we going to ask? And what learning tasks are going to be implemented by day for the whole unit? And so this is a new concept for us in Madera, is unit planning, but it's definitely having some positive results. A question that Heather asked in some conversations is, how do we know that this approach is working? How do we know that this is having an impact, and what impact is it having? Here you see a 6th grade example, and when you see where it says strong, that means proficient or advanced. We're measuring our student learning in weak, moderate, and strong, keeping it very simple. And so when students are weak or moderate, how are we intervening? But we're seeing that our formative assessments, summative assessments, and even last year on the state assessment and NWA, we're closing the gap. It's slow, it's small increases in students meeting or exceeding standard, up to by 4% in 1 year. And the year before that, we closed the gap with distance from standard significantly. We had the highest growth in distance from standard coming out of the pandemic. And then last year, we continued to close the gap in math and ELA. Teams are having more effective collaboration, instruction, assessment, intervention. We're seeing pockets of success. And the biggest thing for our teachers that are implementing this with fidelity and really committing to the work, it's improving teacher satisfaction. Teachers are feeling more effective and less burnt out when they're following this process with fidelity and committed to the work and with an enthusiastic and positive mindset. It takes a lot of support from leaders and teacher leaders and just the whole staff. But again, that goes back to culture. What kind of culture do you have? Do you have a culture where everyone's working in silos and closing their doors, or are they truly collaborative and supporting each other when they need a reminder to administer an assessment, or when they've been out sick and they're going to share lesson plans with each other or strategies, or they're going to take each other's kids when they can't be there one day to give that important math lesson. And so those are all important aspects of the culture. Turning data into information. This is what our assessments look like. We've transitioned to more online. We use a program called Illuminate. We have transitioned to online assessments. All the assessments kids are taking are online. And so we are doing a combination of paper pencil, but a lot of summative and formative assessments are online, and it gives the teachers immediate feedback on kids meeting standard, exceeding standard, by student, by standard, by unit. So on the right-hand side, that's a class roster of results for a post-assessment, and the blue and green are meeting or exceeding. And that's by questions. So we can analyze questions, assessment question types. We can analyze how the errors kids made. We can analyze their strengths, and then look at what reteaching or intervention needs to happen. And so this information illustrates the success of students. And when we are analyzing the correlation between summative assessments and formative assessments, and then NWA or the CASP or the state assessment, then that's when we can look at, by the end of the year, we could predict, as a matter of fact, if students are going to be successful in those external measures by looking at our summative assessments. And if there are discrepancies, then that gives us more information to analyze. Did we teach the right standards? Did we teach them to effectiveness? And where do we need to adjust? But if we don't have this information and we're not organized in this way, then we're shooting in the dark. So we are being very specific, very intentional, so that we can have the information that tells us, are we being effective? Again, we are chasing effective instruction. We're not chasing test scores. We're not chasing tests. And that's a mentality that we have to switch. We're chasing effective instruction and intervention. If we can get effective with instruction and choosing the right essential standards and teaching those effectively, then our kids are going to do well in external measures. And so we're seeing that a sixth grade team that is highly effective in collaborating and learning is showing success. We have a fifth grade and sixth grade team with first year teachers, 6 teachers totaled in those 2 teams, and then 3 are first year teachers. They're having the highest performance in the school. Conditional growth is through the roof with those grade levels in the fall semester, and they have strong leaders in those grades that are a little bit more experienced with the new teachers, but they have strong unit plans. They have strong research and inquiry mindset, that they're always learning, they're always sharing practices, and they're looking at the data to understand what it is students need to do better each time. And so this is very, very intensive, heavy work, and it's impacting the morale of the staff. And teachers are self-reporting that their work as teachers is more rewarding. They can go home and spend more time with their families and engage in self-care. Teachers and teams are improving learning outcomes. We're clarifying the work, and teachers are having a positive work-life balance. Teachers are saying this. They're saying this. They're saying, because I have all this time to collaborate with my team, and it's organized, and I have my unit plans, I have my data, I have my lessons done, I don't have to spend all these hours at home or on the weekend doing this, and I can come to work rested and ready for my kids. And so we have that mentality. Our kids, it's not just my kids, it's our kids. And so when we have that positive mindset about these are our kids and we're all responsible for them, then we start to see outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beto. What I love about this school-based example is there's a lot of talk about what we can do to accelerate student learning that feels like an add-on onto schools. And this approach is really saying, how do we make our schools different to do the work of supporting our students and supporting our educators? So I'd like to invite up Benjamin Cottingham. Benjamin, you've been studying the implementation of school-based approaches like this. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about how to think about spreading this structure and how you build systems to sustain it beyond one school site.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to the rest of the panelists. Beto, as a former teacher, I can attest to how wonderful it is to have your students lift you up in the morning, especially when you're having a tough day. But now in my current role, I don't get that experience. And so I live through the data that you share with me that shows positive impacts on students and teachers over time. So I appreciate you sharing all of that information with us this morning. As Heather shared, what I'm going to talk with you all a bit about before we break into table talk is some of the research that we've been doing on how do we take bright spots or examples like schools like Beto's, where we're seeing these market improvements in student outcomes, changes in instructional practices, and share those across the state in a way so that it's not isolated anymore. I think we all hear about bright spots all the time, but I want to know how can we move those bright spots to where that information is shared in a way that others can learn from it and grow from it. And so I know this morning we spent a good amount of time setting the context, so I won't belabor those points. We had all the gloom and doom we could handle. But just to frame the reason for the need for this learning acceleration work and the research that we're doing, we have seen SBAC scores continue to lag behind the 2019 levels. This continued with the 2023 scores that were released recently, about a 4.5 point difference between 2019 and 2023 across all student subgroups in both ELA and math. Additionally, what I want to focus on through this conversation is how we have a very unclear continuous improvement model in California. One of the things we're really good at as a state is identifying what we want to work on. We want to work on community schools. We want to work on English language development. We want to work on improving math scores. What we're not as effective at is identifying how we implement those policies or frameworks with fidelity. And so most of the work that I'm going to describe for this research process is based around a pilot project that CCEE has put in. Beto School is one of the schools participating in that project. It is across 5 districts and 8 schools. And the idea is that CCEE has partnered with Solution Tree to implement the PLC at Work model that many of you are probably familiar with. But the difference is the way that the model is being implemented. It's a very high touch and, as Beto shared, intensive process where each of the schools is receiving up to 100 days of in-person coaching over the course of those 3 years. And so wanting to understand then how do we take the learning from those places to develop them as model schools to then share across the district so that we now have a model district to build from off of that individual school. One thing that, again, I want to raise up, Beto named it greatly, is this empowers teachers as the instructional deciding factor in the school. They're still able to choose how they want to instruct students and what lessons they want to teach, but the ask is you have to show impact of that work on student achievement, and you have to be able to discuss it with your peers so that they can learn from you. And that's a fundamentally different ask than what we have in many of the schools and districts in California. And so Beto shared a lot of the resources and artifacts that his school has produced going through this process. What I'd like to share with you here is there is a flow to this. And this is a flow that's been implemented in multiple states around the nation. We have model schools in California that have put this into place, but it's based around the 4 primary questions for what a PLC looks like in a school. You want to define what do we want students to learn, so the essential standards and progressions that Beto named. How will we know if they've learned it? The common formative assessments, the unit plans, the summative assessments, as well as a place where they can be found and examined by both the teachers and the administration supporting them. How will we respond when students haven't learned the material, and how will we respond if they have? So the intervention and extension activities that need to be provided to students. And so I think seeing this structure is super helpful in understanding that there is a process that these schools are going through. When Beto talks about the need to develop the culture initially, what we saw at all the pilot schools this previous year, the first year of the pilot, was that they spent a lot of time defining their mission, vision, values, and norms for the work before engaging and creating some of these artifacts, such as the progression standards, the CFAs, the unit plans. And so really building that strong foundation around questions 1 and 2, before this year they're now putting in some of those interventions. But even so, prior to having the interventions, as Beto shared, we are seeing some pockets of growth for those teams that are further along, just from having those solidified common pieces that they can work off of. And when I say common, I mean the curriculum, the standards, and the assessments to talk off of. So how is this model different? Why does this matter? We had the privilege to go and visit some of these model schools in other states and talk to districts in California that are applying to become model schools and see how their processes look different from the dozens of districts and schools we work with in learning networks across California. The first thing that really stands out is the collective efficacy that you feel when you walk in the school. There's student data for all classrooms publicly displayed in a way that shows the growth of those students over time. It is in the teacher planning room, so everyone knows where each other's students are at. Additionally, I never heard any teacher say, these are my students. There are students. When you go into the PLC meetings, and when I say PLC meetings, generally these were grade level meetings, The teachers would talk about one another's students even if they weren't their primary teacher, whether it was their homeroom students or other students in another classroom. They knew where all of those students were at. And from those test scores that they had looked at together, they could decide what intervention would take place. And so that doesn't fundamentally sound different. But the way that it's different is that the interventions would be shared. Rather than me as a teacher being responsible for intervening for all of the variety of student needs that I may encounter in my classroom, I could separate those out among my peers so that I would be intervening on the standard or practice that I was most comfortable teaching as demonstrated by my student achievement. And there was common exchanging of students in that way to have those conversations. Additionally, the work freed up the principal to act as an instructional leader. So many times we say, if only the principal had more time to be the instructional leader of the school and support their teachers and be the master teacher of the site. Easy to say, hard to do. But in these sites, we would have conversations with principals for hours at a time where they were uninterrupted and able to give feedback directly to the PLC teams, hear the needs from those PLC teams, and then provide them coaches or interventionists to support them. Again, I don't like bright spots. I like systems that help everyone become lifted and improve. One of the things that we spend our time doing at PACE and looking at this work is how can we distill the elements of this model that we know is proven at a school-based level and put it in a California context where we know the district is the focal point. How do we raise up PLC model districts? And from that work that we've done with other learning networks across the state, examination of literature on best practices on scaling, piloting strategies, and taking them to scale, we identified 8 essential elements that we saw present in these schools. Some of these elements you would have heard Beto talk about. They're created by answering those 4 questions: the common curriculum, the common assessments, data that's easily accessible and can be examined at multiple levels within the system. But some of them are foundational conditions that are harder to see that have to be supported by the district office. For example, at each of the sites, they have a guiding coalition with representation from each of the grade levels or subject area teachers to provide feedback, share their progress, share their challenges, and then take information back to the teams that they work with. There has to be an analogous structure at the district level. It can look different in different districts. We've seen site-level administrators convene their principals or subsets of their guiding coalitions to do fish bowls where they share information out and then prepare for then pushing professional development based on student need to their teachers and PLC teams. We've also seen superintendents utilize their cabinet meetings for this, where they bring in teachers to hear directly from them on what's working and what isn't. Additionally, a barrier that we saw most commonly confronted and that Gustavo touched on with his work is we know that they need at least 1 hour of embedded time within the school week to work together and collaborate. In many of these places, we know that the work can begin with a dedicated few working before or after school. That is not a sustainable process. There will be burnout. And I like the phrase that was used earlier. We want this to persist beyond the personalities that are in the classroom or in those spaces. We want to build a system that can work depending on no matter who is coming in or out of the system. And so finding time to collaborate with union in the collective bargaining agreement, bringing the union in early to see that what the work looks like has been really impactful in these places. And that's been true even in places that have historically had a contentious union relationship where they have full support of this model in the schools because the teachers see the value that it provides them. The way that we have space for principal to support collaboration and instruction, there needs to be a similar role that the district is playing to allow a principal to do that. One of the things that we commonly heard from administrators was they would have to actively negotiate with some of their district supervisors or support providers to say, I'm working on this model that is going to allow us to put multiple things into place, whether it is a math need, an ELA need, an ELL need. It will be able to facilitate those things. It is the how we put these policies into practice, but you have to take something off my plate. And so having that conversation earlier, thinking about that from a district perspective, is a really valuable way to accelerate this process. And so finally, because there are implications for what this looks like going from the school to the district level, there's also implications that we want to raise up with you all that we're thinking about for what this could look like for LEA levels above the district, the county office, and the state level. Is there a way that the system of support can be organized to where not only it tells districts and schools what needs to be put in place, but facilitates the how and helps them to implement those policies or frameworks with high quality and fidelity rather than more and more policies? Can initiatives be implemented in a way that aren't layering on top of the LCFF process that we've named that we want to continually improve over time, instead of having categoricals next to those the funding that comes through LCFF. And then finally, in a system like this, we know that there has to be accountability somewhere. There has to be someone providing supports to districts if we want them to maintain the focus on the main thing of schools, teaching and learning. Where would that responsibility lie in the system? So these are some of the questions that we're thinking about as this work progresses, but we're super excited about the first year and the progress we've seen already. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of our panelists. So we are now going to turn it back to you all, and we're going to leave the stage and come join you for this conversation. So as you're talking with folks at your table, some of the things we want you to be thinking about are what questions or observations came up for you in these presentations? What ideas or action items could you take back to your organization or your work? And what statewide policies, structures, or supports are needed at this time? And we're gonna want some tables to report back, either with observations or ideas or questions for the panel. So in your conversation, just be thinking about some of those things that you could bring back to the full group. We'll have about 15 minutes to talk at our tables. So as promised, I'm gonna ask tables to volunteer to share some of their learnings. I know I was at two separate tables having a very rich and robust conversation. I know my fellow panelists likely were too, so we will not hesitate to call on you, but would love volunteers first. So who would like to share some of the questions or observations that came up in their group? My colleague Sam here has a mic that he'll bring around to you, so just go ahead and raise your hand. Come on, don't be shy. You are all sharing such interesting insights. Over here? Okay, you'll be next. Oh, okay, you'll be next. Here he is.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Debbie Martinez. I'm founder of We're La Raza Parents Union. The districts have their attorneys. The school sites have their union. Us parents that are mandated to send our children to school have who? We have nobody. So I developed We Are, the letter R, La Raza, the race, no color, Parents Union. We are a social justice movement, student advocate, parent advocate. We exposed the school to prison pipeline in Central Valley. May of 2018, we proved the biggest region, which was Modesto City Schools. They're in federal courts, May of 2018. We proved they're racist, they're biased, they lack empathy and compassion. I have no grant, I have no 501c. I strictly serve as a activist for my community.
Thank you, Debbie. Do you have a question for the panel?
What I need to know is how do we shut down that pipeline? You're in Madera. I love what you said. We're trying to get that implemented into the bigger regions, Turlock and all of that. We just get roadblocks, interventions, pipelines. I'd like to meet with you on a one-on-one. We were talking about what is our pathway. How do we begin to get in those trenches and really make a change?
Yeah. So
That's our
panelists,
question.
just, if you could reflect on scale, how do we expand a program like this that's really focused on disrupting the kinds of outcomes we see?
I'm happy to take a first stab at it. I think one of it is the collaborative approach, is inviting parents and students to the table. And I think community schools has been one of those access points that provides that opportunity. Oftentimes, when I'm working with labor management teams, it's mostly the classified members that are actually from the community. So what opportunities do we have to actually bring in more voices? It's opening the doors to the parents and students and beginning to scale some of this, and not upwards, which is kind of funny to think about, but more into the schools and giving access opportunities into the decision making of whatever decisions you're making.
And first of all, I applaud you for caring so much as a parent and caring about parent advocacy to create a group, an organization, because parents need representation. And a lot of parents in our community, I can speak for my community, a lot of our parents are afraid. There's a lot of fear out there, especially if the parents are from undocumented backgrounds or fear authority figures. And so we understand that completely, and we have to create safe spaces for parents to get involved and engaged. I'm happy that California schools are safe places for parents, no matter where they come from or their circumstances. And so for parent groups, I would urge parents to ask the right questions and to attend school site council meetings and attend English learner acquisition committees, ELAC meetings, to attend board meetings, attend and participate and make your voices heard at school level committees, and ask the right questions. When I say that, I mean as a parent, and as a parent myself, I ask questions related to what I said earlier. What is my child supposed to be learning, and how do you know, principal, if they're learning it? And so if parents were to start asking me that question, I'm ready, right? I'm proud. I'm ready right now. I can show you documents. I can show you in the book. I can show you in the lessons that teachers are giving what our students are supposed to be learning and if they're learning it. If parents were to start asking more questions like that directly to their principals and teachers, then that puts positive pressure on us to then, if we don't have it together, then we got to get it together. And so for parents, that's what I would recommend, is be involved, continue to be involved, and advocate for that, for schools to really understand what it is kids are supposed to be learning and if they're learning it. And if they don't have it together, then ask, how are you going to next time I come to a meeting, give me a report on how you're doing better with that.
Thank you. Let's go back here.
Hi, good morning still. My name is Steven Almazan. I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships at EdVoice. We're a nonprofit in California, making sure that we're changing policies to ensure children from low-income communities have high-quality education. Not really a question, but we had the privilege of having Adalberto come to our table to share more about the work at George Washington Elementary. And just want to say kudos and just thank you so much for your leadership and your work. He talked about the benefits of having teacher residency programs and working directly with CSU Fresno, and just how amazing it's been to work with teachers who's been able to learn through cultural competency and do a lot of amazing work with the staff. And just thank you so much for your work, Adalberto. And I really hope that more schools across the state are able to utilize and leverage and lean in and really improve their school climate and their school culture, because obviously the work that you're doing has incredible impact. So just want to say thank you so much for your work.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Ahn. I'm the Interim Executive Director at Lead by Learning. And I have a question about the technical versus the cultural shifts that need to be made. I think a lot of times educators focus on the technical because it's also easier to assess where you are in your technical or operational policies and how you implement. So do you have any thoughts about how schools and districts can assess where they are culturally and where their strengths and growth edges are culturally?
That's a big question. That's an important question, is how do we assess the culture? Well, in my experience of having led a school that's had a lot of turnover over the last 10 years, I was talking about that with the table. When I took over Washington Elementary School as a first-year principal, it was very clear to me that we needed to make a lot of changes, and some of those changes were staffing changes. And so when you look at the culture of our school, it's hard to quantify it just with numbers and data. You've got to immerse yourself in walking the halls and going into classrooms and listening to conversations that are happening. Those things are not going to be on any charts or any data plots or any reports, unless the school district and the school is implementing a teacher survey at the end of the year, right? So we get feedback from our teachers on Panorama teacher survey at the end of the year. So that's one way that we get assessed as leaders from our teachers. And some of it's good, a lot of it's good, but some of it's very honest. And some of it is, at times can be, you can feel it's personal, but then we have to take a step back and look at perceptions, right? So there's perception data, there's street data, there's quantifiable data. And so surveys are one of the main ways that we could quantify the culture. But the true culture is the things that aren't said in front of the leaders, in front of parents, those backroom conversations, the lunchroom conversations. And so it's a multi-layered approach to understanding. But walking the hallways, entering the school, I'm big on my secretaries in the front office. You're the first face anyone sees, and you're the when they call the school, right? And so it has to start there. The custodians, the kitchen staff. So we get feedback like this. People come onto our campus who've never been there, and what they say about our campus is, I love how welcoming it is. I love how everyone's smiling and saying hi. To me, that's one of the biggest compliments of our school culture. And then when substitutes come out of the classroom and say, the students at Washington behave so well, they're so respectful, that's another clue about our culture at the school, right? And so there's a lot of ways to quantify it. And so it comes from parents, it comes from kids, it comes from subs, it comes from visitors. But I would say if you want some data, then surveys are one way to go.
Thank you so much. And can I just extend on this, Gustavo and Benjamin? Some of the conversations that I was a part of said, what do we do in the schools that are early adopters? They all want to. The teachers are raising their hand or they have a good baseline culture. What about the places that say, no, we're good? Or we think students in this school are doing about as well as they could be, right? How do you start to get better buy-in for this kind of work?
So I think one of the things that I've heard and seen done in a lot of these places is the idea of taking something and being transactional at first to then become transformative. And what that means is just try it. You've heard the idea. It's come from an expert, maybe outside the building in some way. You've heard it from a peer. Try this strategy in your classroom. Just see how it goes. No stress attached to it. And then from that, you can begin to build some of that buy-in. I think anytime, as I said, I get very happy when I see student outcome data in any form, because now we can have a conversation that is based in the reality of what our students are experiencing. And I have yet to meet a teacher who doesn't want to improve the experiences that their students are having, or an administrator that doesn't want to improve the experiences that their students are having. And so I think for getting buy-in there, it's nice to say we can do all of these culture building activities, and those are important things that need to be done in a lot of those spaces, but those alone are insufficient for changing practice, which was what we ultimately want to get to if we're going to move teaching and learning forward. And so that idea of transactional, just give it a shot, to transformative, now that we can look at what that impact has been really powerful in a lot of these places where we've had active dissenters to begin with.
Thanks, Benjamin. Gustavo, you're going to get the final word.
Final word overall?
Yeah.
The pressure's on. So I think when the hardest thing to do is measure something that's not tangible, right? Like measuring trust. So going back to your question is how do we assess this? It's really difficult, right? We're running into the same issue with community schools, right? How do we measure the success of a community school if it's about culture and climate? In the same way, if we're supposed to build structures for more truth-telling, right? More abilities to hear from the other, it's really difficult. So one of the things we talk about in the labor management teams is how do we build psychological safety in order for it to be more truth-telling in that space. So the first step is getting to know your team outside of a professional development or professional environment. So I would suggest that the one team talks about knowing 3 things about each team member. 1, getting to know their name. 2, their needs, and 3, their story. Oftentimes we think about our students and understanding where they come from, where their needs are, but how do we understand the culture and climate through the conversations that are not quantifiable and we're not seeing in data sheets? So in addition to, right, they should go hand in hand. So it's really hard to assess just through surveys or just through data. So how do we also have those conversations? Because everybody wants to tell you what they need. Right? I want to tell you what I need, mostly money, but essentially everybody wants to talk about their needs, and essentially that would be the first step.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thanks to all of you as well. So now we're going to lunch. You'll see in the back there is a full spread of lunch options for you. You can go upstairs, you can go into any of the other rooms or common spaces. Take your time, we have 45 minutes, and we're gonna meet back here for our keynote address at 12:30.
Thanks. Awesome. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, likewise. Yeah.